Okay, so this is class 1. It's really exciting. I think it's like really very good timing for you. Your first class is the first class. Everyone else came in the middle, and we'll see if it's like better for you. You can tell us all. History of Torah and Halakha. So Jews believe that our way of life, our religious lifestyle, the mitzvot we observe are a partnership between what was given to us by God and what we ourselves legislated and enacted and developed on our own. And even the part that was given to us by God, we've had to interpret to figure out what it means. Okay, so that's Judaism, that's Torah, that's Halakha. That's the way. Halakha means Jewish law. It really means like the path to follow, and it's the system of mitzvot, the system of commandments and minhagim and customs and practices that are from the Torah, that are from the rabbis, that have kind of been interpreted and developed through the centuries. Before the earliest stories in the Torah, in the book of Genesis and the Exodus, the Jewish people had a relationship with God. Abraham, Isaac, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they all, the 12 tribes, they had a relationship with God that was not based on a comprehensive legal system, right? You didn't have a sense that Abraham did justice, and he welcomed guests, and he exhibited kindness, and he, was a developer of ethical monotheism, as his story is described in the book of Genesis. You don't have a sense that Abraham had a religion, that he had a comprehensive religion. There are some religious practices that develop in the book of Genesis, some that develop in the book of Exodus, and then you have the moment of standing at Sinai where God gives us the Torah. Sort of a range of opinions, a range of understanding the moment of Sinai, how much of the Torah was given at Sinai itself, and how much was given over the 40 years of Moses' leadership in the desert, and even, let's say at a minimum, we say that the written Torah was given to us by Moses, and that the written Torah is the product of a uniquely sensitive divine revelation. Every word in the Torah was dictated by Moses from God directly, and then that became the nucleus of our way of life. So let's just actually take a look at the written Torah. I'm going to take one out, actually. Move the camera, because I want you to understand what is and what is not in the written Torah. I'm going to move the camera to the table. Why don't you gather around? We'll look at our Some of you been close to a Torah before, or I guess that's important. No, let's do that. Let's do this. Okay. I'm going to push down and you pull the cover off. Great. Okay. Alright, come around. I want to see what you notice, what's here, what's not here. Okay? Please. Okay. So this is written on parchment, not paper, so it's made of animal skin. It's written by hand with a quill feather with ink by a scribe. It takes a long time to write, as you can imagine. So what do you see, what don't you see? And so I guess, so most of you read some Hebrew. If you want to read this, what would help you? The letters are pretty much the same, right? It's a particular font, so it might take some getting used to, but these letters are basically the same letters as we find printed in the prayer book and the Chumash. Same Hebrew that you know how to read. What do you find? What don't you find? Punctuation, right? There are no periods at the end of sentences. There's no way to know where a verse begins, where a verse ends. What else?
Vowels.
Vowels, right? We call vocalization, right? The little, dots and lines and dashes that indicate how the vowels. Okay, the letters are just consonants. So there are no vowels. There's no punctuation, no commas or periods to indicate where the verses begin and end. There also are no. It's like when the Torah is read in public. If you've been to a synagogue when the Torah is read, it's like chanted. It's like a particular melody, which also serves as a form of punctuation. And there are signs that you can read, that you can study to learn how the Torah is meant to be chanted out loud. That's not here either. just the letters, really. The letters and the spaces between the letters indicate where the words begin and end. You have these paragraph breaks. Some of them are at the end of lines, some of them are at the middle of lines. You have those. The Torah is divided into these paragraph breaks. So in certain places, I guess between one book and the next, there are longer breaks. There are poetic parts of the Torah where there are many more spaces to indicate a kind of poetic structure, but no other punctuation. So the written Torah, right? This is what Moshe kind of dictated and handed over. It leaves a certain. There's a lot that's missing if you want to understand it to be able to read it. Okay, so everything else is part of tradition. That right. So Moses taught this Torah to his students, to the Jewish people, but as he taught, he read it. So then they had a tradition, an oral tradition, of how these words sound, because the same letters can be vocalized in different ways to have very different meanings. Tense and future tense, past tense, just depending on how you stress the words and which vowels go with which letters. So that tradition of how these words sound when read out loud, that was an oral tradition. That was not committed to writing. Centuries later, thousands of years later, there was some people called the Masterites who said, let's come up with a system to write down how the Torah sounds when it's being read, and they invented the vowels in Hebrew. Okay? They came up with a system of but it's like that came out of a desire to commit to writing the way the Torah sounds when it's read out loud.
Wait, when was that?
Around the year 1000 of the Common Era. So like 1,000 years ago, which is a long time after the Torah. Okay? For a very long time, it was just an oral tradition. You would memorize, you would listen, you would learn, you'd hear how the Torah sounds, and then, and that went alongside this tradition of what the letters are.
So was there no written Hebrew?
There was, when you know that?
Well, because they didn't, writing, I know conversationally, right, throughout a lot of periods they didn't speak Hebrew in biblical Israel, but was anybody writing in Hebrew?
Other than the Torah, other things written in Hebrew. Yeah, sure, there are lots of things from the biblical period written in Hebrew.
It's sort of the same thing where you, how do you differentiate without...
Yeah, so usually by context you basically can figure it out by context, but sometimes it makes a big difference, and where the sentences begin and end is kind of important. We don't have much, we have parchments don't last very long, so the oldest, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls are from the 1st century, let's say, and that's, I think, some of the oldest surviving Hebrew manuscripts, writings we have, but that's a long time after the Torah.
Right.
Even though it's 2,000 years old, it's still a long time after the Torah. In terms of older Hebrew, it's all carvings,
things like coins,
inscriptions, coins, and we have so we have really ancient stuff, really really cool stuff, but it's not long stories or anything. It's just whatever it says on a coin, the year this, the year that, this king, that king. We also have stamps for these are sign a document, seal a document, put wax, and they would so we have a lot of those from really really old, from the biblical period. Okay, should we close it up? All right. That's the written Torah, folks. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Since there are no page numbers or anything,
Yeah.
you just always when we start again at the beginning,
Yeah.
so it's just always at the right place, or what if you were looking, trying to find something?
So meaning every time you come to every time you come to shul, it's they're at the right place. Yeah. So that's because people, they're behind the scenes. There are people who make that happen. Generally, since we read one portion at a time, generally it's more or less the right place. If you, for a special holiday reading, you got to roll the Torah to the right place, and to find it, it's not always so easy, because you read a passage and you're where is that? That sounds familiar. I don't remember which book it's in or which chapter. The more you know, the easier it is to see a verse and say, oh, I know where this is, and the verse and the part that I'm looking for comes later.
Right.
Books are really great. The invention of the book as a technology, is really great, because you can flip pages, and that's really neat. Okay. Before books, scrolls are just much less useful than books. Okay. But we still keep that tradition for our Torahs. Okay. That we can scrolls. Any other questions? Okay.
So those spaces, those aren't aliyahs, right?
No. Those are it's Sorry, those are not. Those are like paragraph breaks in the Torah, and the Aliyah division is a little bit came later. And
Oh.
yeah, yeah. There were different traditions actually of how to divide the Torah. In the land of Israel, in ancient times, they read the Torah on a 3-year cycle, and the Babylonian practice, which we adopted, is to finish the Torah in a 1-year cycle, an annual cycle. So we finish the Torah every year. In Eretz Yisrael in ancient times, they finished the Torah every 3 years. So they spent less time, presumably, in shorter.
Does Israel still have like they do in a year?
Yeah.
Because I know they have some like different.
Yeah, they
holiday
do, but not
rules.
Yeah,
and
no,
traditions.
it's basically everyone has the same Babylonian tax.
Can you help this?
Please. Right. Can you slide it on?
All right. So maybe you sit down on the chair and it can be a whole
Okay, right.
the whole Hagla and Gewila.
Okay, I'm going to, when I carry the Torah back to the Rabbi, it's appropriate to stand, because when the Torah is up and traveling, we should stand. Great. Maybe seated. All right, cool. All right, that was the Torah. All right.
Do you want to put the video back?
Thank you. It's kind of interesting to watch all your faces. Thank you. Sure, everyone watching at home, okay? Thank you for that. So part of the oral Torah, right, is to how the words sound and where the verses begin and end. And we believe that also came from God, that Moshe heard that from God as well. The oral Torah is also divine. This really distinguishes Rabbinic Judaism, the form of Judaism that we practice, from some of the other forms of Judaism that existed in ancient times. The time of the Second Temple, the time of Jesus, and the late Second Temple period, there were many, many, many different forms of Judaism. Even people talk about Second Temple Judaisms. There were so many different varieties back then. I guess Christianity is one of them, maybe, in that you could say, and Rabbinic Judaism is the other one that survived. All the others basically vanished. But one of the distinguishing features of Rabbinic Judaism is its belief that the oral Torah is also from God. So at a minimum, the oral Torah includes how the words sound, because just the written Torah alone doesn't really tell you how they sound and what they're supposed to mean. And the oral Torah also includes the interpretation and explanation of what the written Torah says. The written Torah says things that are cryptic. The written Torah tells us to observe mitzvot without giving us details of how. And the oral Torah fills in those gaps and tells us how to observe the written Torah. So the oral Torah also it was preserved to us and transmitted and eventually made known to us by the rabbis of the classic rabbinic period, but we believe it also goes back to Sinai, also as part of Revelation. However, the rabbis also discovered things in the Torah. And here we get to a topic which is subject to some controversy, which is important but ultimately doesn't matter. Okay? And this is about Midrash Halacha. Midrash means explaining, interpreting, deriving. So that's one of the genres of rabbinic literature. Midrash, you take a verse, and Rabbi X says it means this, and Rabbi Akiva says it means that, Rabbi Meir says it means this, Rabbi Yossi says it means that, and this genre of rabbinic literature is called Midrash. Midrash has two parts, Midrash Agadah and Midrash Halacha. It's all on your sheets as letter C, okay? Midrash Agadah is taking stories in the Torah and expanding them to, what are the details that are missing? Or so, I don't know, the Torah talks about Abraham. God spoke to Abraham and said, get out from your land and go to the place that I will show you. It doesn't tell us why. Why did God choose Abraham? Major unanswered questions, this big gap in the Torah's narrative. Just sort of tells us about Abraham, doesn't tell us anything about where he came from and why God chose him. So the Midrash comes and fills in and tells us a backstory of why Abraham was special. So that's not in the Torah itself, that's just somebody, looking at the Torah, reading it very carefully, and providing some contextual information to make sense of the Torah. Midrash Agadah is not obligatory, you don't have to believe it, right? If you find it a compelling explanation, that's great. If you don't, come up with your own explanation. It's just one person's opinion. Midrash Halacha is on the legal parts of the Torah, the parts where the Torah gives us mitzvot. Midrash Halacha is how to observe these mitzvot. What do the words mean, and how do I live my life based on them? So Midrash Halacha is binding, you have to follow it, because if you didn't, right, if every person opened up the Bible and followed practically, like I will just do whatever this tells me to do, what I think it means, then everyone would have his own religion. I mean, Protestants in theory read the Bible this way, and there are lots of kinds of Protestants, but they don't really follow mitzvot comprehensively, so it's not such a big deal for them. But for Jews who are trying to observe the mitzvot as one community, we have to have some way of, we can't just let each person read the Torah and come up with, right? For example, I'll give some examples. Torah says that the holiday of Shavuot, one of the biblical pilgrimage festivals, very important holiday, it's observed 49 days after, it says Macharat HaShabbat, the day after the Sabbath day. You start counting 49 days on the morrow of the Sabbath, and the 49th day after that is Shavuot. So what does the morrow of the Sabbath mean? Macharat HaShabbat in the Torah? Hazard a guess? The morrow of the Sabbath? You might say it means the day after Saturday, meaning, what do you call that day?
Sunday.
Sunday. So Shavuot is 50, right? It's always on a Sunday, 50 days after Passover, right? Or the first Sunday after Passover. Okay? You might think that, and you'd be wrong, okay? Or that's just not the choice that the rabbis took. They said, no, Shabbat in that verse means Passover itself. It means a festival day, a special day, a holy day, a day without labor. It's referring to the first day of Passover. We start counting the 49 days till Shavuot, starting on the day after Passover, and Shavuot can be any day of the week, or not just on a Sunday. If we want to celebrate Shavuot on the same day, so we're going to have some way of figuring out when the holidays occur, and we're going to have some method. So that's also part of the oral Torah. Now, some believe that the oral Torah was also was the product of a comprehensive revelation. When Moshe got the written Torah and God told him the oral Torah, this is what the words sound like, we're going to put the verses, they're going to divide, and here's some other information as well, give you some other details as well. Included in that was also this comprehensive revelation of, and when the Torah says the day after Saturday of Machar Shabbat, Shavuot, that means the day after the first day of Passover. And that's what's meant by that verse. Moshe was told that as well. Others say no, Moshe wasn't told. Moshe was just told, here's the written Torah, your job is to interpret it and understand it and to figure out what it means. Right? So maybe the revelation of the oral Torah was a little more limited, and when the rabbis were expounding and engaging with Midrash Halacha, maybe they were discovering the meaning, the legal meaning of these biblical verses for the first time. This is a very big dispute. Understand the significance, right? So this tradition that Shavuot can be any day of the week, not just on Sunday. So maybe God told Moshe that Shavuot doesn't have to be on a Sunday, or maybe somebody in Jewish history read the Torah very carefully and offered that interpretation. This is what it means. That's a very, very big difference, right? How comprehensive was the revelation of the oral Torah? But it's not such a big difference. Why is that such a big difference? Why does that matter all that much?
We follow it either way.
Yeah, exactly. We do it anyway, okay? We follow the rabbis anyway, okay? Whether it's the product of a comprehensive revelation or whether or not it was discovered in the classic rabbinic period, we follow what they say. Okay? So the Midrash Halacha is the definitive legal interpretation of what biblical verses mean. When it comes to study and the stories, and even the legal section, where we can be creative and think of our own meanings and offer our own interpretations with no limit. But when it comes to practical guidance, like how I will live my life, what do I do? Then the rabbis of the classical period, they determined the legal meaning of biblical verse. So even though the Torah says, you shall take these words that I command you, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your home and on your gates. So I might say, that sounds like a metaphor to me. To me, that sounds like a metaphoric image of like how the Torah should be part of our lives. We should always think about monotheism. And that's like a totally fine interpretation you can offer of what those words mean. But practically, we decided centuries ago, thousands of years ago, no, actually, the way you fulfill that line in the book of Deuteronomy is to actually write that paragraph and put it on the doors of your house, which is what we all do. So there's the free reign in interpretation, but when it comes to practically what we do, there's an authoritative process, and the rabbis of the classic rabbinic period were the ones who determined the legal meaning of biblical verses. In theory, that could continue to happen. Like maybe there's some verses that nobody said anything dispositive regarding, and there's like new technology and new situations emerging, and could we still go back to biblical verses to derive legal meaning? That would be very, very, very rare. Maybe it's unheard of, but maybe we would do it for something that is totally new, like some assisted reproductive technology situation, or the kosher status of cultured meat, those meat, test tube meat, whatever, all that stuff, right? So maybe you would here's what I'm going to offer, since there's like no precedent whatsoever for so much of, or seemingly no precedent for some of these new technological issues, so maybe we go back to the very, very basics. We would offer interpretation based on scripture alone, but generally we don't do that. Yes?
Maybe it's too much in the weeds, but at what point is that interpretation, and it has to do with this, from a mezuzah to include, some people have traditions that now it's every door frame in your house versus just one door frame. Is that kind of part of this kind of explanation of certain things?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer, like what's included in the biblical obligation. Biblical obligation, just one door? Did the rabbi? I don't know, but let's. That's a good question, because I don't know, but we'll answer similar types of questions that Julie answered to. Okay, so that's a good question. So Midrash Halacha, see, this is this genre of writings. I mean, before it was writing, it was sort of oral for centuries. Again, verse, what does it mean legally? Okay, another example, the Torah, we just had in last week's Torah, Torah says 3 times, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. So you might think, that's kind of a gross, cruel thing to do, to boil a little baby goat in its own mother's milk to eat. Like, that's kind of callous. Or maybe there was some idolatrous religion that used to do that for some reason. So we're not going to do that, the Torah tells us. And Maimonides says that this is, there was like a ancient tribe of idol worshippers, and this was part of their religious practice, and so we used to separate from them and to preserve our own monotheistic identity. We don't do that. However, the rabbi said, no, it says this 3 times. It doesn't mean don't boil a kid in its own mother's milk. It actually is a general prohibition against cooking, eating, or deriving benefit from any meat that has been cooked together with dairy. So this becomes a major, major part of how we observe the kosher laws, and it comes from a verse that's kind of obscure. Obscure, and it's not obscure, that's the wrong word. Opaque. It's not obvious to every rational person what this verse means practically. But we don't need, we have the oral Torah to tell us what it means practically. Okay, and whether God told Moses precisely this verse that appears 3 times in the Torah, this is what it means, or somebody discovered that, there's a range of opinions. Again, classic Orthodox opinions, that how comprehensive that oral Torah was that was revealed to Moshe, and how much of it was discovered over the centuries. The advantage, the religious advantage of saying it was a comprehensive revelation of the oral Torah is that it grounds our lifestyle and all that we do in direct revelation from God. And so we don't have to say, this is kind of a strange way to read that verse. It doesn't seem to mean that to me. We say, yeah, maybe it doesn't, but this is what God told us, so we're going to do it anyway. And our lifestyle is therefore, the way we live is grounded in revelation. If you say the advantage of saying, no, some of it was revelation, but mostly God just said, take this book and interpret it and figure out what it means, the advantage of that is that the Talmud makes a lot more sense, because the Talmud has lots of, and the Midrashic literature has lots of debates and back and forth, and it means this, doesn't mean that, no, and if it means this, then, if this means this, then what does that mean, and if that, that all suggests that they didn't exactly know in advance what it all meant, and they were trying to figure it out in real time in the classic rabbinic period. So, what happened? Around the year 200, there was a fear that this oral tradition, again, the oral tradition expanded, it was very, very detailed, all the mitzvot of the Torah, with many, many detailed, ways of observing it and how, and around the year 200, there was a fear that this would be lost in time of persecution, whatever else was going on. There was a fear it would be forgotten. And so even though the written Torah is supposed to be written, and the oral Torah is supposed to be oral and not written, the rabbinic leader at the time, same as Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, decided to commit the oral Torah to writing. So he commissioned the editing of what is known as the Mishnah, which is the organized, preserved presentation of the oral Torah. This was completed around the year 200. Once the Mishnah, the Mishnah took this vast sea of oral traditions and distilled and organized and edited into a very nicely organized 6 major books, each book divided into tractates, each tractate divided into chapter, each chapter divided into short sections, the Mishnayot, the little individual Mishnahs, a beautiful masterpiece of editing and organization. As soon as that was done, that kind of culling and selecting and sorting, then the next generation immediately expanded again, because once you have the Mishnah, you ask questions about it. How do we know this? What's the biblical source? Is this biblical? Maybe this is a rabbinic edition. How it says this here, it says it there, which is true. And those questions about the Mishnah continued for several centuries until they too were edited and collected into what we know as the Talmud. So the Talmud is the preservation of several centuries worth of questions and answers surrounding the Mishnah. We'll take a look in a minute. We'll see this. We'll see some examples in a minute. What else do I want to say? The sages, the rabbis who existed in the generations leading up to the Mishnah and who are mentioned in the Mishnah, they're called Tanaim, the teachers. People like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. These names may be familiar, Rabbi Meir. And then the generations of scholars that were active after the Mishnah and who are found in the Talmud, because they ask questions about the Mishnah and teach about the Mishnah, they're called Amoraim, those who recite and say things over. People like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Chisda, okay? Names that you may hear at some point. Yes?
Who's the Rambam? And
Much later. He's
Later.
medieval.
okay.
We'll get there. So in a minute, we're going to take a look at some of these books. I think we'll end with that, just to we'll gather around and look at some books. But just also worth explaining that so the content, again, the mitzvot themselves. What do we have? So we have biblical verses, which we don't really know what to do with on their own, because you can't live your life based on a biblical verse. They're too sparse. There aren't enough details. It's really hard to know what they mean. They can mean 1,000 things to 1,000 different people. So we have the rabbinic interpretation of biblical verses that is contained in the oral Torah and ultimately codified, written down, recorded in the Mishnah and the Talmud. You also have rabbinic legislation where there's no pretense to it being from the Torah, but this is a rabbinic decree that the rabbis added to create a fence around the Torah so that people wouldn't violate the mitzvot of the Torah. They added additional fences. So for example, let's go back to the example we had with the dairy and the meat. The Torah itself says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. The rabbis came and taught us that, it says that 3 times, that means there's a biblical prohibition against eating, cooking, and deriving benefit from any dairy and meat that have been cooked together. So that's not in the Torah literally, right? It doesn't actually say that in the Torah. The Torah just says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. That's the rabbis who come and teach us that. But when the rabbis teach us that, they're teaching that in the capacity as interpreting the scripture itself. And so the legal force of those prohibitions those are biblical prohibitions. If you violate one of those, you violated a Torah level prohibition with all of the consequences of violating a Torah prohibition. And if you obey it, you're obeying what the Torah itself tells you. The rabbis also came and gave us some rabbinic legislation, for example. They said, also don't eat poultry with dairy, because maybe you'll confuse it with meat. So that's not in the Torah, that is rabbinic legislation. So we follow it anyway, but it has a different level of legal force. If you violate that prohibition, the consequences are not so severe. In certain extenuating circumstances, we can override certain rabbinic prohibitions. If you have various emergency, complicated situations, we want to know, is this a biblical violation or a rabbinic violation? Can we turn the biblical violation into a rabbinic violation? Like if you have to break Shabbat and you do it with your elbow instead of your hand, okay, that turns it from a biblical violation to a rabbinic violation. And maybe there would be cases we would want to do that. Like you're at the hospital, God forbid. No, they're not at the hospital having a baby, okay? Happy occasion, okay? Okay, you can go to the hospital on Shabbat because when life is in danger, we violate Shabbat. But then they say, great, we're so happy to have you at the hospital, great, step right in, we're going to come into the labor and delivery room, just sign right here, this release form. So, signing your name, is that connected to life-saving? Is that really, on the one, they're not going to treat you if you don't sign your name, so it kind of is. On the other hand, it's not part of medical therapy for the patient or to sign her name on the form. So maybe though, instead of signing out my full name, I will only write one letter, which is below the threshold for violating the biblical commandment. Just make an X or something, or just a little scribble. Maybe I'll use my left hand, which is an awkward, and unusual, and inefficient way for me to perform the task of writing. And that also makes it into only a rabbinic prohibition, not a biblical prohibition. And that would be a case where, no one's in danger, right? I'm not gonna, so I can I'll use my left hand and I'll make a little mark on the paper instead of using my right hand to write out my full name. And that way I'm only violating rabbinic prohibitions in a case where it's really important that something get put on that paper so they can treat, the person who needs treatment. And you shouldn't do that if it's going to be delay and somebody needs emergency treatment. Don't be too clever and sign your name. Just get the person the treatment they need. But if in a case, let's say of labor and delivery where you really maybe have some time, you have 3 extra seconds to sign your name in a slow way with your left hand. That's worthwhile. Questions so far? What I've said? I said a lot of information. The 2 little packets I gave you kind of have this all spelled out in greater detail. So I encourage you to read it at your leisure. I should add that to the readings here as things that I offer. Jay Harris's book, How Do We Know This, is a very sophisticated book-length treatment of this question. Just making a mind to add this to the thing. So questions, yes, no? No? All right, let's look at some books, okay? Maybe we'll gather together on the big table. All right. That's a beige.
Yeah.
All right. You should all. Oh, okay. You'll have phones with you? Do you all have? Let me do this on. Let's do this online. That's actually going to be. Let's do that. Here, go and go. All right. Let's get the. Go to, if you go to sefaria.org, sefaria.org, I went books for them, so give them some business, all right? They have an app, you can download it if you wish, but you can also just go in a regular web browser. Do you find it?
What is it again?
Sefaria, sefaria.org. So even without, whatever, I encourage you to get the app, and it's a great resource. You can look at it on your desktop as well, laptop, whatever. You have the library. Do you have all the different? It says browse sources, right? See Mishnah as one of the options. So click on Mishnah. Okay. So you have 6 siddharim, 6 different orders of the Mishnah. So Seder Zraim is all about agricultural mitzvah. Seder Moed is all about Shabbat and the holidays. Seder Nashim is about marriage and divorce and other things like that. Seder Nezikin is damages, torts, court procedures. Seder Kachim is the whole sacrificial order of the temple. All things were offered in the temple. Seder Taarot is the system of purity and impurity that governs access to the temple and access to sacred things in ancient times. And those are the 6 orders of the Mishnah. So let's go to Seder Moed, the second one. Let's look at Sukkah. Okay, that sounds good. See it? Click on Sukkah. And you should have the first chapter. Do you have it in Hebrew and English, or just Hebrew? What do you have? Both. Perfect. So a sukkah. So you know what a sukkah is? A sukkah is the hut that we dwell in for the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, it's like a. Okay, it's actually interesting. Now notice, so the Mishnah just starts. A sukkah taller than 20 cubits is invalid. It doesn't say what a sukkah is. It doesn't say when we. It sort of starts in the middle, assumes that you know everything already, and it just tells you some details. If it's taller than 20 cubits, it's invalid. Rabbi Yehuda validates it. He says it's fine. And one which is not 10 handbreadths tall, or does not contain 3 walls, or whose area of sun is greater than its shade, is invalid, right? Because the sukkah can't have a regular roof. It has like plants and stuff, thatched roof, grasses, branches for roof. So it has more sun than shade. It's invalid. It has to have more shade than sun, mostly covered. Okay, but not completely covered like a roof. So you see this, the Mishnah, and then the question you want to ask is, okay, so why? Why is a sukkah that's really tall and bad? What's wrong with a sukkah that's too tall? Why does it have to have 3 walls? Does it have to be 3 full walls? Can they be? What if they're 2 walls and a half? Why are full walls not necessary? More shade than sun, why is that? What if it's 50-50? Okay? These types of questions then get asked once the Mishnah is edited around the year 200. These questions, so let's go back in your Sefaria to, and then go to Talmud. Right? See that? Back to the library, see the Talmud? See that? Good? So let's go to see Sukkah in the Talmud. So you click on Sukkah in the Talmud. Oh, you don't have the, can you have the English there or not?
Yeah.
Good, okay. So it starts, right, with the Mishnah. See, the Mishnah there is quoted, and it begins with the Mishnah we just saw. A sukkah, which is more than 20 cubits high, is unfit. Rabbi Yehuda says it's fit. And so the Mishnah then says Gemara. Gemara means, that's the Talmud, that's the later discussion around the Mishnah. So it starts by comparing to a totally different topic, which says, we learned a similar halakha in a Mishnah there, in Tractate Eruvin, in the case of an alleyway that's higher than 20 cubits, that is the beam that was placed across the edge of an alleyway. This has to do with an Eruv. You want to carry on Shabbat, you have to put a beam across the alleyway. It can't be above 20 cubits. If it is, you diminish the height. So here in Sukkah it says it's invalid. In Eruv it says just diminish it. So why the different language? The concept seems the same. Why is the language different? That's a question we did not anticipate. Okay? And then it goes on and discusses. Complaints are different because the sukkah is a biblical mitzvah, the Eruv is a rabbinic, entirely rabbinic thing, and so that explains the difference. And then it gives another explanation. Then it says, well, where is this from? What's the source? So it says, well, because the Torah says in Leviticus, you shall know that I caused the children of Israel to reside in Sukkot when I took them out of the land of Egypt, and if it's more than 20 cubits, you're not going to realize you're living in a sukkah. Because you'll look up and you won't even see this, it's like so high. You won't realize it's a sukkah. So it has to be shorter than 20 cubits in order to, okay? So question answers. The answers are often biblical verses. The answers could be other rabbinic sources that are not in the Mishnah, other outside material, and the conversation continues and continues until eventually you get to the next Mishnah. So that's the Talmud. So it's so the Talmud is, the way it's organized is a Mishnah, 3 or 4 lines, 5 lines, 10 lines, and then a page or 2 or 3 or half a page of discussion about that Mishnah, and then the next Mishnah, and so on and so forth. Any questions on this? Okay. Now you know Safari is a great resource. It has the Bible there, it has the Midrash, the Talmud, lots of Jewish legal texts, some liturgy as well, much of it with translations, some of it not yet with translations. It's a really neat resource. So, okay. Maybe we'll pause here and continue next time. Does that sound good? All right? That's a lot of information. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Let's see what next chance to meet. Oh, I can't meet next week. The 27th. I can't meet next week. Then the 27th is the week of Purim. And I'm worried I'm going to be really busy for Purim. You should all be getting ready for Purim, okay? It's a really fun holiday. You should all celebrate with us, okay? So we're not going to meet that week either. The week of March 6th, I'm out of town that day, so that's not good. March 13th. Wow. There might, March 13th. Let's meet March 13th, okay? And at 7, is that all right? You know what? Let's not, you know what? There might be something else that day. I'm gonna have to schedule, okay? Please pay attention to your email, okay? It's a long time from now anyway. I'm sorry, it's gonna be a couple weeks that I can't week without the next class, but, and then Passover's coming, will be a lot of missed weeks, but pay attention to the bulletin, pay attention to your emails, and please show up, you know, whenever it's, I'll try to get something announced in a couple of days, okay? I just gotta check out a few things that may or may not be happening that day. Yeah, then once you get to March 20th, it's already really near to Passover, so we definitely, yeah. So we might only have one class, between now and Passover, we might only have one class, which might be on the 13th, or maybe another day that week. And, but you should, there'll be like some pre-Passover classes you should consider coming to, and please celebrate with us and join us for the holidays. And, you know, if you don't have a place to celebrate Passover this year, obviously you turn to us and we'll find you hosts as we do every year, so. Okay, sound good? All right.
Thanks.
All right, you're welcome.